next speaker is Tassie Hirschfeld. And Ms. Hirschfeld, if you would identify yourself and let us know, your title and your expertise, and share your information with us. You're recognized.
Sure. Thank you so much, Senator Standridge and the committee, for letting me speak to you today. My name is Tassie Catherine Hirschfeld. I'm a professor in the anthropology department at the University of Oklahoma. I do not represent the university right now. My research area specialization involves post-Soviet countries, particularly autocratic countries, and the transition out of communism in the 1990s. My interest in this particular issue has more to do with, I'm not directly in the path, but I'm very close. But all of my interactions at the meetings, at the OTA Public Forum, I have to tell you it was so familiar to my time in Cuba, when a bunch of arrogant bureaucrats would announce policies and the public was expected to obey. And so that was part of my motivation in wanting to compile information to present to you, and also to dive into the history, business, and finances of the OTA. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. I know we're short on time. I'm happy to give supplemental information if anyone is interested. So starting with this little managerial word of wisdom, every system perfectly calibrated to achieve the results it is getting. The results that I see when I look at OTA's finances are not good. They have a bottomless hole of debt, plans to take on quite a bit more, along with multiple lawsuits with fairly compelling evidence of misbehavior, including building illegal turnpikes. They have constructed more toll roads than any other state, and they have generated enormous public outrage. And honestly, none of us would be here today if this was a well-run organization. So that's sort of my summary, and let's talk a little bit about how we got there. So I'm breaking this down into 3 analytical points, and again, I'm going to go through these quickly.
Ms. Hirschfeld, I apologize for interrupting. Would you mind if I ask the chair, ask you one quick question?
Sure.
So where are you located with regards to these 2 turnpike routes? Do you say you're not there? Do you reside in downtown Norman, or
No.
do you reside?
I reside in East Norman. I'm probably less than a mile from the route that's planned.
Okay, all right. I was just kind of
my house is not directly in the town, at least not yet.
Thank you.
Of course, they could always change that. And again, I'm happy to take questions, but I am going to go through this quickly, so if you have a question, just let me know. So in my analysis, I see 3 interrelated problems in looking at all of OTA's history and documents and my interactions with them. One is cross-pledging, which you've heard quite a bit about already today. The second is there's no independent oversight of transportation sector and no cost control in projects, and that is actually very important. And the third is that there are no limits. The legislature puts no limits on OTA's borrowing, spending, or taxing. And it's important to remember a toll is a tax. It's a tax that is in some ways voluntary, meaning that it's sort of collected as people are using the service. But the more toll roads we have, the fewer options there are, and the less voluntary that becomes. So here's my visual explainer of the way turnpike finance is supposed to work. The banks have a giant spigot of money. It comes to the Turnpike Authority. They build turnpikes. They collect tolls. Those tolls go back to pay back those loans to the bondholders. And then eventually they get paid off and we don't have toll roads anymore. That's not how OTA actually works. The giant spigot of money flows into the Turnpike Authority. The drivers pay, but because of cross-pledging, mismanagement, poor cost control, those turnpikes never get paid off. Instead, the loans are always refinanced. The banks make a huge amount of money from this, as anybody who's ever refinanced a house can tell you. That line item of fees is significant. It's a percentage of the total. And then on the downside, even further, communities get destroyed, unnecessary, unauthorized turnpikes. And even worse, as we're learning in Norman, cities lose all control over land use planning, including long-term planning, protecting the watershed, limiting development in vulnerable areas. So this, to me, is, again, indicates why OTA has the problems that it does and some points of intervention. And I apologize if this metaphor seems a little crude, but this is absolutely what it's like to wade through their documents. The banks provide an all-you-can-eat buffet for money. The Turnpike Authority consumes as much of that as they possibly can, and then they just excrete all of these giant land use destroying highways throughout the state with no regard for whether they're wanted or needed. Moving on, why do we have these problems? Again, cross-pledging, it sounds strange, but this is fundamentally a Soviet business model. You rob your successful businesses and use them to support your failing businesses. And the OT's allocation of funds through cross-pledging absolutely replicates this. And it creates a problematic organizational culture because when you have a Soviet business model, you have a Soviet system, which means it's a semi-autocratic system, almost like a state within the state. They do not listen to public input. They do not care about public input. And they keep a lot of information secret from the public that they should not be doing. So if we actually had a marketplace model for turnpikes, no cross-pledging, it would look like this. These are the sort of diagonals. Those are the ones that are both profitable and necessary. They provide an important transportation corridor. The federal highway system goes north, south, east, west. We need that diagonal. But what you see in the other image is what we actually have, which is a lot of turnpikes that don't make good engineering sense, as Dr. Srodu talked about. They don't make good economic sense, and it's just this relentless overexpansion that does not do any service to the people of the state. So we can break it down by revenue, and I've got my little 2x2 table. Some of them you can see are necessary and profitable. Some of them are unnecessary but still profitable, like the Kilpatrick. Again, it makes a lot of money, but I don't know that it needed to be a toll road. But by far, the highest number of turnpikes are in the unnecessary, unprofitable category. I realize now I should have added another column that is unnecessary, unprofitable, and illegal, which would include the Kickapoo, which was never authorized by the legislature. So again, systemic problems that need significant legislative overhaul. And here we are, policy failure number 2, no independent oversight. This kind of collapsing of institutional power over all transportation initiatives in the state has a number of huge red flags. And again, I work in a lot of autocratic countries. Corruption is a huge issue. This organizational structure creates huge corruption risks. And because of the secrecy of information, it's impossible to know. So when we ask you, the legislature, please audit this organization, it's because there are so many red flags. Corruption is not just a risk to the organization itself, it is a risk to the state. Corruption destroys public trust. Even the appearance of corruption destroys public trust in government. And that is already a problem that we have here in Oklahoma. And again, I also want to point out with the issue of oversight, one of the PIKE members actually did an analysis of the OTA board's voting patterns. And so between 2015 and 2022, they took 878 total votes. All of them, all but 3 were unanimous in favor. They were all in favor. There was just 1 dissenting vote 3 different times. That is not oversight. And so without oversight, you don't have accountability, and you get this proliferation of bad behavior for which there are no checks and balances. Again, this is, I could give you an hour's worth of little nuggets like this. This is just an image from their most recent report to bondholders. It's very strange that an organization lists its largest operating expense as other, 30% higher than maintenance, engineering, construction, right-of-way. I don't know why. It's a mystery. I think an audit could help answer some of these questions, or at the very least restore some public trust. And then the last one, this is also extremely problematic. Other states put limits on toll increases. Oklahoma does not. And without limits on toll increases, bond rating agencies, and I've read all of their reports, the bond rating agencies say, hey, we view this as a safe investment for bondholders because the legislature does not put any limits on toll increases. And so what that does is open the big money spigot, and OTA can use all that money to do whatever they want with no oversight, and any mismanagement, any failures of cost control, those get passed on to drivers. And so here we go. This also came out of one of our open records requests. It's the proposed toll increases for the Turner to pay for the access program. These are just based on 3% inflation per year rates, but in actuality, we all know inflation's much higher. So I think we can expect double-digit toll increases on the profitable turnpike to pay for all the ones that are unnecessary and unprofitable. And this is just a quick and dirty, and I won't go into all of it, just of their debt service and their continuing layering on of multiple different kinds of debt. So the bond debt is close to $2 billion. The total payback amount with interest and fees is closer to $3 billion. They've also taken out a number of short-term loans during the pandemic, which is a little bit of a cash crunch, and refinanced some loans. Much of these short-term debt is coming due in 2023. And again, I feel like if we had an audit or an independent person to look at the finances, it could help answer that question of how much of this aggressive push in the access programs is because they're going to have such higher debt service payments going forward. Debt service has been their largest expense since the 1990s, and they have continually miscalculated how high their debt service payments were going to become. So in 2006, they promised that by 2023 they would be paying $74 million per year. It actually is $128 million per year, and that doesn't include the short-term debt. So this is just, again, a little mini case study. This is the low-lying fruit that somebody like me can find very easily. The Gilcrease extension, the outside engineer's total cost estimate was $250 million. OTA, for some reason, decided to borrow over $400 million. The final cost is a little bit unclear. Again, I'm going on public documents, newspapers, around $325 for 5 miles of highway. That's a lot of extra money, and it's really unclear where it all went. And so it gets even more confusing. In their original 2019 documents, they promised their bond investors they would always own and operate the Gilcrease. In their most recent document, they're like, hey, we don't own the Gilcrease. Who owns the Gilcrease? Can anyone answer that question in this room? And if OTA were a well-run agency, this question would not have to be asked, especially by someone like me. And my last point here, can OTA legally collect tolls on a road that they claim they do not own? And again, a well-run agency doesn't run into these kinds of problems, and it just to me says we need a lot more oversight and a lot more accountability. Again, people in Tulsa obviously very unhappy about this. When confronted, OTA said we had funding challenges. When I look at the numbers, the challenges I see that you took out $100 million extra beyond the cost estimate, and then somehow you need to put toll booths where you said that you wouldn't. So again, the public outrage dimension of this is only going to grow as the turnpike system continues to grow. So these are my last policy recommendations. I've got them in 2 categories. I like market-based solutions. Again, as someone who's worked in the Soviet, post-Soviet world, markets are very powerful. And so when we look at OTA that they do not like legislative oversight, obviously, they try to resist it. A great market-based solution would just be to let them be a private highway construction company, which means no power of eminent domain. You have to balance your budget. You don't have cross-pledging, and you cannot use the successful parts of your business to support the failing parts. So that would solve a lot of problems. A better option would be a little bit sort of a pick 2 from this menu, but just to limit their ability to impose toll increases. That will put the brakes on some of the borrowing and the excessive debt, make a sunset plan to retire some of that debt. And then the very last thing, and I realize it's more important, shouldn't be last, but mandatory reporting of all real estate transactions. Their financial documents list, I believe, $300 million worth of real estate as one of their assets. That number fluctuates by millions every single year, so they're buying and selling property. None of this is disclosed to the public. And again, speaking as an anti-corruption researcher, that is the biggest red flag. Like, you cannot have anonymous buyers and sellers with these kinds of transactions with a state-run agency with no oversight. So that's all I have. I'm happy to elaborate on any points, and this is just the basis of my analysis and a little bit about my expertise. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hirschfeld. Appreciate your time.